I want to tell you about two schools with two different sets of rules. When I was a teenager, a well-known organisation came to my girls' school to deliver a session about rape and sexual assault. At one point, we were asked to discuss the work in pairs and discuss what we would do if we were attacked by a man. So my friend and I talked about it, and we talked honestly. We decided that we would fight back. But when it was our turn to share our answer, the trainer told us that we were wrong. Not that fighting might be dangerous in some situations, not that running away might sometimes be the safer option. We were simply told that we shouldn't fight back. We should run away, and that was it. I remember feeling quite angry. Even then, I understood that danger doesn't come with one correct response. Running may save somebody's life. Fighting back may save somebody's life. Freezing might do it. Freezing might happen automatically. You might have no control. Complying may be the safest available way to survive. The right response depends on the person, the perpetrator, and the circumstances. But what I've thought about more and more over the years is actually what the boys at the nearby schools were being taught. Probably not through a formal session like we were. More likely through their friends, their families, films, sport, jokes. And I thought about the ordinary expectations placed on boys as they grow up. Their message was probably almost the opposite of ours. They were told to fight back. Stand up for yourself. Don't run away. Don't be frightened. Don't let anyone overpower you. So the girls were being told that they were defenseless, and the boys were being told they had no excuse for failing to defend themselves. Two schools, two sets of rules, both very wrong. Somewhere in the gap between those messages were boys, teenagers, and young men who had frozen, submitted, or complied because they were terrified, and who may then have believed that the way they'd survived meant that they'd failed. There are rules that nobody writes down. We give boys rules from a very early age. Not written rules, not anything they're formally asked to agree to. The quieter rules they absorb as they grow. Be strong. Don't cry. Don't be frightened. Stand up for yourself. Fight back. And don't let anyone take advantage of you. And as boys become teenagers, young men, another set of expectations is added to this list. Men always want sex. Sexual attention is flattering. Being wanted by a woman is something to boast about, not something to fear. A real man would be able to stop somebody. Those messages are often presented as preparation for life, as encouragement to be confident, strong, resilient. But what happens when a boy, a teenager, or a young man is harmed and he can't stop it? What happens when he freezes? When he complies because he is terrified? When the person harming him is older, stronger, or has authority over him? When his body responds in a way he didn't choose and he does not control? He may not only carry the trauma of what happened, he may also carry the belief that he failed some test of what a male is supposed to be. And that belief can keep him silent for years. There's nothing wrong with teaching young people resilience. I'm a great believer in it. There's nothing wrong with encouraging them to stand up for themselves. It's good. But the problem begins when strength stops being something we encourage and becomes something that we demand. When a boy or a young man receives the message that he must always be able to protect himself, any experience in which he could not protect himself may then begin to feel like a personal failure. He might think, why didn't I stop it? Why didn't I fight? Why did I go along with it? What does this say about me? Those questions place responsibility in the wrong place. The responsibility belongs to the person who chose to harm him. But that might not be how he understands it. Because he's spent years being told that people like him are supposed to remain in control. When something happens that takes that control away, he may feel not only frightened, violated, or confused, he may feel ashamed. Not ashamed of what was done to him, but ashamed of himself. And that is one of the most damaging things these rules can do. They can make the victim feel responsible for not preventing the actions of the perpetrator. We often talk about the fight or flight response. It's a familiar idea. When somebody is threatened, they either fight back or run away. But human survival responses are actually more complicated than that. Some people freeze, Some people become quiet, some comply, some try to calm the other person down. Some mentally detach from what is happening. Some continue behaving normally afterwards because they haven't quite processed what has happened to them. A person may do whatever their nervous system believes is most likely to get them through the situation safely. These are not always conscious decisions. They're survival responses. But boys and young men are rarely taught that. They're much more likely to hear that they should have fought back. They should have been strong enough. That they should never have allowed it to happen in the first place. So a young male victim may look at the way he had survived and mistake it for consent. He might think, I didn't say no loudly enough. I didn't push them away. I didn't leave. I didn't fight. Perhaps that means I allowed it. But not fighting is not the same as consenting. Freezing is not consenting. Compliance under pressure or fear is not consent. Trying to keep yourself safe is not consent. And someone should never have to prove that he fought hard enough before we recognise that he was harmed. There is another source of confusion that can be particularly damaging for male victims. The body can respond physically to stimulation even when the person is frightened, distressed, or unwilling. That physical response is involuntary. It does not prove desire. It does not prove enjoyment, and it does not prove consent. But a boy, teenager, or young man may not know that. He may believe that because his body responded, some part of him must have wanted what happened. The person harming him may even use that response against him. They might say, you liked it, you wanted it, your body proved it. But the body does not make a moral decision, it reacts. And that reaction tells us nothing about whether the person agreed. It tells us nothing about whether he felt safe. It tells us nothing about whether he wanted the sexual contact to happen. Without clear education, a male victim may carry enormous shame about something his body did automatically that he had no control over. He may believe that his own body has disqualified him from calling himself a victim, but it hasn't. There are boys missing from examples. Several years ago, when I was working as a police trainer, I was given case studies to use in sessions about abuse and safeguarding. They were based on real situations and they were intended to help officers recognise what abuse might look like. Every child victim in those case studies was female, not one was a boy. That might sound like a small detail, but it isn't. When every example of an abused child is female, we begin to train people to associate childhood victims with girls. We shape what professionals notice. We shape the questions they ask. We shape the person they imagine when they hear the word victim. And we make it more likely that a boy sitting directly in front of them will be missed. That doesn't mean the girls should have been removed from the case studies. It means boys should have been included too. Because representation in training is not cosmetic. It affects professional instinct. What we repeatedly show people becomes what they learn to recognise, and what we leave out can become almost invisible. The victims themselves absorb that absence too. If a boy never sees someone like him described as a victim, he's going to conclude that the word doesn't apply to him. If every example shows a girl being harmed, he might believe that what happened to him must be something different, less serious, or less real, or that somehow it's his own fault. Disclosure becomes even harder when the person causing the harm is someone the young person has been taught to respect. A teacher, a coach, religious leader, commanding officer, senior colleague, a family member. Someone older, someone trusted, someone whose position seems to make questioning them impossible. Children and young people are often taught to obey adults. Young recruits are taught to follow authority. People in institutions may be told that loyalty, discipline and toughness are essential. And most of the time, those values are not intended to enable harm. But they can create conditions in which challenging the wrong person feels almost unthinkable. The young victim may think they're respected, people are going to believe them, not me. Maybe I'm misunderstood. Maybe it's my fault, maybe I caused this. Maybe speaking out will harm the whole place, when everyone. Will telling somebody make it worse? Sometimes it does. So the disclosure is minimised. The person is told to move on. Their behaviour is questioned, their sexuality is questioned, their masculinity is questioned. Or the institution protects itself instead of protecting them. And the original harm is then followed by another betrayal, the discovery that the people who should have helped were more comfortable with his silence than anything else. Some environments intensify pressures: boarding schools, residential settings, sport, military, emergency services. I worked in the police service. I certainly found that could be true sometimes. Anywhere that places a strong value on toughness, loyalty and endurance. These environments can create pride, belonging, resilience, which is fantastic, but they can also make vulnerability feel dangerous. A teenager or a young man believing that challenging sexual abuse could change how somebody sees him. Will he still be respected? Will people think he's weak? Will they take the mickey out of him? Will it damage his career? Will it say something about his sexuality? Will he lose the identity in the community that mattered to him? So silence becomes safer. Not because what happened didn't affect him, but because disclosure seems to threaten everything he has. So when we look at silence from the outside, we might ask, why didn't he tell somebody? But from the inside, not telling may feel like the only way to survive. It's also important to understand that somebody might disclose without using the language we expect. For example, they may not say, I was sexually assaulted. They might say, I got myself into a bad situation. I was drunk. I froze. I don't know why I didn't leave. It wasn't that serious. He may even laugh while saying it. He might make it sound like a story. He may minimize it before anyone else has a chance to. But this doesn't mean that he wasn't affected. We use humour to protect us, to create distance. Sometimes uncertainty is the result of never having been given the language to describe what happened. Sometimes it was nothing really means I need to tell somebody, but I'm terrified of what will happen. The response in that moment matters enormously. It doesn't need an interrogation. It doesn't need somebody to ask why he didn't fight or leave or why didn't he not report it. He doesn't need to be told what he should have done differently. What he needs is calm. He needs somebody willing to listen. He might need to hear that it wasn't his fault. You didn't cause this. Your response does not make it your fault. And you don't have to decide immediately what to call it. Tell me as much or as little as you want. I'm taking you seriously. Perhaps we need to change the rules that we give boys and young men. Strength does not mean never being frightened. Strength doesn't mean being able to overpower every person who threatens you. Strength does not mean remaining silent. And masculinity is not measured by whether someone managed to prevent another person from harming him. We can teach young people to protect themselves without teaching them that being harmed is a failure. We can teach confidence without denying vulnerability. And we can explain that survival responses are automatic and they vary. We can teach that physical arousal is not consent. And we can include male victims in safeguarding education, case studies and support information. We can teach boys that they're allowed to have boundaries. They're allowed to not want sexual attention, that being male does not make every sexual experience welcome, and that asking for help does not make them less capable, less masculine, or less worthy of respect. These are not messages that make boys weaker. They give them a more honest understanding of strength. When we learn that a man carried an experience silently for years, it's easy to ask, why didn't he just tell somebody? But perhaps that's not the first question we should ask. Perhaps what we should ask is, well, what had he been taught would happen if he did tell? Had he ever seen a male victim treated seriously? Had anyone explained that freezing, compliance are survival responses? Had he been taught that his boundaries mattered too? Had the people around him shown that vulnerability would be met with care rather than ridicule? Had our training, our institutions, and our culture ever made space for somebody like him? Because silence doesn't appear from nowhere. It's learned. It's reinforced. And sometimes it begins with rules given to a child long before he has any idea why those rules might one day matter. Be strong, fight back, stay in control. Don't let anyone see you're frightened. But perhaps real strength is not about never being harmed. Perhaps it's about knowing that being harmed does not diminish you. that survival is not failure, that your body's response does not decide whether you consented, that what happened still counts, and that you are allowed to speak. A boy should not have to grow into a man before anyone tells him that. A teenager should not have to carry shame for the way he survived. And a man should not have to spend decades believing that silence is the price of being seen as strong. We can give boys and young men better rules, and we can start with this one. If somebody harms you, it is not your failure, and you do not have to carry it alone.